This episode contains specific and graphic information about a crime. Please be advised.
She was known as the mother hen. She looked after all her friends. So I really wasn't worried a lot about Baylie. But that night, it was just a series of unfortunate events that led to tragedy.
True crime prevention. Let's expose how all crime starts the same way, with a chance. Today, we won't give it a chance. I'm Paul DelPonte, and I work with McGruff the Crime Dog. Thanks for joining us. Today, we're very fortunate to have Shawnee Baker with us as a guest and talking about what is probably every parent's worst nightmare. And we thank her for her courage to be able to do that so others can learn from what is truly a sad and horrific story. So, Shawnee, thanks for
Thank you
joining
so
us.
much for having me on. I'm so grateful for these opportunities and being able to share Bailey's story and hoping that we can save lives and prevent this from happening to someone else.
Absolutely. And, as I travel the country and meet different survivors and parents of victims, it just warms my heart to see so many people who have the strength and courage to be able to rise above the tragedy and that into hope for others so you don't suffer the same fate. And with that, why don't you give us a little background into your daughter, Baylie, who was a promising young student when tragedy struck?
So Bailey was really exceptional. She was just such a smart girl. She was the light of everyone's life. She knew how to make others feel good. And she just was friends with everybody. Everyone was drawn to her. She just had such a bubbly, happy personality. Bailey was a neuroscience major, headed into her sophomore year at the University of Miami, and that had been her dream school. The University of Miami was on her dream board, and she wanted to go there more than anything. She was accepted to several other schools, but that's a school she chose, and we couldn't hold her back. That was what she wanted. So we were a little nervous. We were concerned because Miami can be a dangerous city. But she went through her freshman year. Everything was great. She had a good set of friends. She was in Zeta Chi Alpha sorority, which was a really great influence on her. They really focus on championship for charities and breast cancer awareness and friendship and unity. So we were really happy with how things were going for her. She was on the equestrian team at the University of Miami, and she was going places.
Really, yeah. I mean, just really well rounded. And as I'm sitting here as a parent hearing this, you start to relate and realize how similar we all are.
Yeah. That summer, she wanted to get ahead of the curve a little bit. She knew that organic chemistry was coming up and it was going to be a tough year. So, to be in the neuroscience program, you have to have a very high GPA. And she wanted to make sure that she kept ahead of things. So, she advanced her credits by taking some sophomore year credits through the summer for physics. She took 8 credits and she worked 2 other jobs. So, she was a pretty busy girl. And then she lifeguarding and waitressing through the summer to make extra money for school. She really didn't go out a whole lot because, she was just so dedicated academically to what her goal was. And then that first weekend back, I'd spent the week with her and her roommate, getting their room set up and making sure they were settled on campus. I left on the Thursday night and we went on a sailing trip Friday morning. That first weekend, I talked to her from the sailboat on Saturday and she said, "You know what, Mom? I'm gonna go to a 21st birthday party this weekend." One of the guys from last year that I knew well, he's turning 21, having a pool party, and then we're gonna go out with the sorority girls Saturday night. It's probably going to be the only time I get to go out for a while because I'll be really focused on school. So we talked about that and being careful and, text me, let me know you're okay. All of the stuff that mothers do, all of the stuff we tell our kids if they're going to go out. And she was a careful girl. I mean, she was known as the mother hen, the one who was always the designated driver. She looked after all her friends. So I really wasn't worried a lot about Baylie, but that night it was just a series of unfortunate events that led to tragedy.
It sounds more than unfortunate. And as you tell your story, I think it's important. And what unraveled that night was crime, and Bailey was
She
a
was.
victim. So, how did things start unraveling?
So, and just so the viewers are aware, I've told this story many times and it has been several years for me. I would never have been able to do this in the first 2 or 3 years after the tragedy. So that strength takes a long time before it comes. I just want people to be aware of, I may seem very stoic, but it's only because I have to do this to be able to share her story. So that night, they were at one of the clubs in downtown Miami, the girls, the sorority girls and Baylie. They had gone out in the afternoon to the pool party and there had been drinking at that 21st birthday party around the pool. Unlike, so many kids, we like to think it's not going to happen, and it does. So she was drinking underage. But you know what? Baylie knew her limits. She was a responsible girl, and she chose to not drink anymore and drank water throughout the evening. So at the club, bartenders didn't serve her anything. She was drinking water. She had had enough. She wanted to head back to campus. This was close to midnight, I think. And the boy from the 21st birthday sent her a text and said, look, I'm at the club across the street. Meet me on the sidewalk. We'll get a ride share together and go back. And she said, great idea. I'm going to separate from the girls. I'll meet you outside. She tells the girls she's going to meet this boy, which they don't really like because they don't want to separate. The rule is we stick together. But she said, don't worry. He's going to meet me and I'll text you as soon as I'm with him. So she goes outside of the club, but he stood her up. He didn't show. So she's texting him and he says, I'm not coming, I'll meet up with you later. So she tries to get back in the club, but she can't because she has fake ID and she can't get in. So she calls for an Uber herself to head back to campus, lets the girls know what her plan is. She's waiting for her ride and she's approached by two other boys who claim to be students at the University of Miami and tell her they are med students. They're also headed back to campus. They know the campus well. They know the dorm rooms. Evidently, they're staying in the same dorm rooms right near hers. So she's pretty happy about that. And they tell her that their ride will be there any minute now. Why not jump in with them, save the money, and cancel hers? So she cancels her ride share and she gets in with them. They aren't 5 minutes in the car when she realizes they're not students and they're not headed back to campus. They're going on in a different direction away from campus. They've booked a 5-mile loop. I don't know if she knew that at the time, but she knew they were not going in the right direction. She sends texts to her friends and says, I'm lost with some random bros. They're sketchy guys. I really don't know where we are or what we're doing. They won't tell me their real names. At some point on this loop, they stop at what appears to be a convenience store for water. And the story is that they're going to go get some water. But the one boy stays in the car, man, I guess. Turns out they're in their 30s. So he stays in the car with Baylie in the back seat. She's in the middle. And the other one jumps out. There's a video camera on the street that shows the car and the door opening. You can see Bailey's leg in the car at the time. And he goes to the apartment above the store where he actually lives and comes back with a solo cup of water for Baylie with a straw. He gives her that in the back seat, and her text to her friends are, they're trying to get me to drink the water too much. And at some point in that ride, she spills the water, which gets the driver angry, and he tells them there's going to be a cleaning charge for this spill, and asks them to get out. By then they've done a lot of the loop. They're close to being back in the area where the clubs are. So they get out of the car. One boy stays with Baylie, the others kind of cleaning up the mess a little bit. And then he tells the driver, he says, I gotta go, runs into the club that is right there where they're all standing, and comes running back out with another water in an open. He reaches in his pocket, but the video camera on the street has an umbrella that covers what he's getting out of his pocket. But he tries to give this water to her as well. But at that point, she gets away. They're not chasing her. It's not an attack, but it's quite sneaky. And they're absolutely trying to get her to drink the water and stay with them. So she starts calling her girlfriends and saying, something's wrong. I can't use my phone. You need to come get me. And they say, Baylie, we can't come get you. It's now very late. It's pouring rain and we're 3 miles away from you. Because at this point, the girls have now all gone back to an apartment on Red Roads where some of the sorority girls were staying. So there's text messaging back and forth between Baylie and the girls and Baylie and the boy who was going to meet her on the street, who now starts texting her saying, "Where are you? Let's meet up. I hope you're safe." This conversation happens. So there are several FaceTimes, phone calls, and text messages between Baylie and the boy, and Baylie and her roommate who was with several other sorority girls. The sorority girls talk about it. How are we going to get Baylie home? And they can't come up with an answer. They don't know what to do. They can't send her a ride. There's no way to get her, and she can't use her phone. And the conversation is, "Baylie, you called an Uber about 8 times today. Why can't you use your app?" "I don't know, but I don't know how. Come get me. I need help." The girls decide to send her a pin by text, and they say, "Can you open the pin for our location?" And she says, "Thank God I can do that." And they said, "Okay, then just start walking and we'll follow you on Friend Finder." So it's a tracking app, and they follow her and they watch her walking and guide her through phone calls and text and say, "You're getting close, you're almost here." And they walk her right into 6 lanes of traffic. She's hit in the 6th lane of traffic. Witnesses at that scene, 2 different witnesses, describe her as being zombie-like, completely zoned out, like an out-of-body experience. They say they've never seen anything like it. She crosses the street completely unaware of her surroundings. She does not acknowledge the horns beeping, the headlights flashing, the cars that swerve to avoid her, that slam on the brakes right at her hip and yell at her. And she never once turns and looks at any of them. She walks like a zombie. Police describe the video of her crossing the street as someone who is drugged, not someone who is drunk. She never once stumbles, and she doesn't walk like a drunk person walks. She doesn't stagger. She doesn't waver. She walks in a perfectly straight line. He told us they had seen video of people walking who had been drugged before. They told us, "This is the city it happens. We've seen it, and that's what she looks like." So we knew from all of this circumstantial evidence that Baylie had been roofied in the water before she got away from the 2 men. The Sex Trafficking Coalition reached out to us and questioned us about the circumstances of booking the 5-mile loop, and that they have known it to be a practice of men who will book a rideshare for a loop, 5 to 10-mile loop. They drug the victim in the Uber ride and then transport them to the hotel across from the airport. 2 other students at the University of Miami experienced this after Bayley's tragedy. They both were able to return to university from the hotel at the airport, but the same story happened to them. We weren't able to get anything out of this, any justice. When Baylie was taken to the trauma room, she was not tested for drugs or alcohol. There was no toxicology done on her. We got the phone call on a sailboat off the coast of Maine. I didn't have service because we were 3 hours offshore. So we didn't get the phone call till Sunday morning at 8 a.m. At that point, we had to get back to shore, get a flight, and get to Miami, which we ended up in a layover at JFK for 6 hours. We didn't get to her until 11 p.m. Sunday night. We didn't hear from police until the following morning, when the police came in with the video and said, "We are suspicious that your daughter has been drugged." So we asked at that point, was her blood tested for this? And we were told that it is a common practice in the state of Florida that there is not any blood levels done for toxicology, blood alcohol levels on a trauma patient, period, anywhere, in any hospital, because insurance companies will deny the claim and they want to get paid. So that was our first surprise. We asked that be done. We said we believe she was roofied and we need to press charges against these men who are on the video. And we were told that because we didn't have the legal paperwork to be power of attorney, healthcare proxy advocates, Baylie had never signed a HIPAA waiver. We were not her guardians at that time. Once a child turns 18, they are considered an adult in the eyes of the law. And unless they have authorized you as her parent to make decisions on her behalf, the hospital ethics committee takes guardianship of an incapacitated child over the age of 18. So we were told if we wanted guardianship, we could go to court and get that. It would take a couple of months. But in the meantime, without that HIPAA waiver, how did they know if Baylie wanted us to know if she was drugged or had alcohol in her system? And because insurance denies the claim, there was no authorization to draw this blood work. The police finally ordered it. I mean, I shouldn't say finally. We immediately went to them and they said, oh, of course, we'll tell them to draw it. But it was too late. These drugs, these illicit date drugs or drink spiking drugs, they call them illicit drink spiking drugs, are not the kind of drugs that stay in the system for very long. Phenol has a half-life of about 12 to 24 hours. GABA, GABA and ketamine, I believe, are the other two. All of them stay in the blood for a very short period of time. And by the time they drew the blood, it was all gone. So we lost the evidence to press charges. So the police questioned the men who had drugged her. In our opinion, it was a very poorly run investigation. My husband at many times had to continuously call. He put up a $10,000 reward for anyone who had information on the men who had been with Baylie. And then the police said, let us do our job. We will investigate. The police asked them questions of which we have the videotape or the audio tape of. And some of the questions were, why did you go into your apartment? And he says, I forgot my ID. And the officer said, it's 1:30 in the morning. You had already been at the clubs all night. Why did you need your ID? And he said, well, normally I keep my ID in my phone. Did you have your phone on you to book the Uber? Yes. Well, where was your ID? Well, I have two phones. This story was just so sketchy. And, even where were you sitting in the car? I sat in the front seat the whole time. Baylie could have jumped out if she wanted. That wasn't true. Not only is there video of that, but the Uber driver says that the two men sat on either side of her the entire ride. She could not get out of the car. Unfortunately, we didn't get a lot out of the Uber driver because when he was interviewed, he didn't speak any English, so he had a hard time translating or understanding what the conversation was between Baylie and the men. And then when they asked the other man his story, it contradicted the first man's story. Why did you give them the water? Why were you so interested in giving her water that even after she cost you a $200 cleaning charge on your rideshare, that you ran into another club to get her more water? They couldn't answer these questions, and the police just let it go. They just dropped it. They just said, okay, end of story. No trial, nothing. So it's very frustrating knowing that these guys are still out there. Our biggest concern at that point was to protect the other girls. So my husband wanted to warn the students who were with Baylie that night. He wanted them to know what had happened to her so that they would be very careful if they were out at the clubs to avoid this situation. But the school wouldn't let us share. They wouldn't let us tell anyone. They asked us to stay quiet about it. And in fact, when we continually pushed to say, no, we need to warn them.
Why do you think they were telling you to stay quiet?
Because what we've since learned is that the reputation of these schools is everything, and they don't.
I think that is part of what we do in drawing awareness to these situations, because we all have a responsibility. No, school's not the criminal. The Uber driver's not the criminal. But the constant, what I'm hearing in your story is this disbelief from the victim that is sort of a current even with the police. And this sounds like a situation where there are criminals who are still likely at large perpetrating this and other crimes. And when I said we give crime a chance, that's where we all have to step up and make sure we don't give it the chance. And so thank you again for pursuing this and not giving up, because I'm sure in that moment you did not have the same wherewithal and emotion. And I think one of the lessons is to trust the victim. There was enough evidence there and the reputation of Baylie to clearly illustrate this is not an instance where someone's trying to pull the wool over our eyes.
That's right.
It's an instance where we're trying to get at the truth, and people sometimes get in the way of the truth for various reasons. The university's worried about what other people say. I think one of the constant issues we have in middle schools as we try to do education on crime prevention and safety is, they're too young, or it doesn't happen in our school, but it happens
everywhere. And one of the problems for us was that we were just so emotionally distraught at the time that we could not speak our voice the way that we are now. We just didn't have the strength to do it. We trusted that the police were doing their job, and we were really focused on Baylie. She was in a coma for 6 weeks. So that's where our attention was, not with the crime.
Absolutely. And did you have to pretty much relocate
Oh,
to
yeah, we
Miami?
were in Miami for that time. What became really clear afterwards was how common this is and how unsettling it is. Since starting the foundation, we've had so many parents reach out to us with stories. I mean, not particularly roofie stories, but stories of tragedy that happened around college students where justice was not served and the schools did not step up and share the danger. What we learned after Bailey's incident was that there were two more girls who were picked up at the clubs, taken on a loop, given a drink and an Uber ride, and actually woke up at the hotel across from the airport. In both of those cases, the girls did get away once they realized they were at the hotel by the airport. But there were never any charges. And again, shush, nothing shared.
So as you're waiting 6 weeks and things progressed and you're still trying to collect your mindset, the police just dropped it?
The police continued the investigation for several months after the fact. And again, mostly because my husband was so persistent that we continued to do this. But at the end of the day, we were told,
And we thank him for that.
yeah, but we were told without the drug in Bailey's system, they would not be successful in prosecution. That's where we were stuck and very upset because that was only the first step where the law failed us, because we felt that the law failed us in the criminal investigation, but it also failed us with medical law. We asked for Bailey's healthcare records to be shared. We wanted the initial MRI and CT scan to be shared with fellow neurosurgeons that we knew in New York and Boston who had reached out and said, look, send me the scans for a second opinion. But we were not able to access those medical records because we didn't have the forms we needed. We had not signed those forms at the age of 18. 4 weeks later, we transferred Baylie to Mass General. And when we were at Mass General, they brought us into a room the following morning. Gosh, it felt like 20 people in the room. There were social workers, ethics committee, nurses, doctors, neurologists, it was overwhelming, and they said, we have some very bad news for you. And we already knew it was bad news, but we were preparing for rehabilitation, we were preparing for home care, whatever was going to take place. Told that Baylie would survive this with significant damage, but that she would live. And they let us know that there was a brainstem injury in the initial scans that was overlooked by the hospital in Miami, and that they missed it. It was Kendall Regional Hospital, and they did not see this injury, which had a 1% survival rate. That combined with her injuries, we were facing 4 other significant bleeds, traumatic brain injury. She was still in a coma. That put her at almost incompatible with life, and they felt that heroic measures had been taken. They had no documentation of anyone ever surviving the damage that Baylie had experienced. And we were faced with that decision at the time. And once again, we ran up against problems with the law because we were not power of attorney. We did not have the authority to let her go. And we did eventually win that case, and we were able to let Baylie die, but that didn't come easily. That was a real legal battle for us.
So part of your moving on, and you mentioned the foundation, and I know you recently wrote a book. And tell us about, was there a point in time when you began having more of your awareness and you were back to more of your old self, that a trigger went off that said, I need to do something?
It's funny because that trigger went off in the ICU waiting room. I knew then that I would write this story, and I knew that we would have a foundation for her, whether she lived or died, because I knew there needed to be more done. After we lost Baylie, I spiraled into a deep depression. I had complicated grief. I was pregnant. I delivered a baby 3 months after I buried my daughter. And so then I went into postpartum depression and psychosis. I was on suicide watch. I mean, it was an entire 2 year period of trauma for me. So I just didn't have the strength. I couldn't do what I thought I was going to be able to do. But as I started to come out of that, in the fourth year, fifth year, I knew it was time. And I started to feel strong enough to do this. And I thought, you know what? I have to do this. Baylie deserves better than this. I owe this to my daughter, and I will continue her legacy for her. The book is to honor Baylie, and it's quite a story. It's the story of her life before, the story of the tragedy, the crime, and then the story afterwards. And I'll just give you a little piece of that. When we went to the dorm room to get Baylie some of her things, they were packing it up. It was going to be shipped home. But we gathered a few things, personal items, and on her nightstand, there was a book, and it was written by Dr. Adrian O, and it was about being in a coma. It was called The Gray Zone, Into the Gray Zone. I picked up the book. This was just for pleasure, this reading. And I looked through the book. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. She was reading about her destiny. I opened the page where her bookmark was, and it was about a 19-year-old girl hit by a car who's in a coma. And here was Baylie in a coma, hit by a car. I took the book with me. I continued to read it because I wanted to know what Baylie knew about being in a coma and what that was all about. The book became my guide for making the decision on Baylie's future. When we went to Mass General, Baylie was admitted under Dr. Brian Edlow, who wrote the foreword for the book. Is one of the gentlemen who studied consciousness in the patient in a coma, the search for consciousness. The trial studies on the quest for consciousness had been done in the UK and Canada, and Baylie became the first patient in the US to undergo the trial study on the search for consciousness in trauma patients in the early stages under Dr. Brian Edlow, who was the only doctor that was doing this in all of the US, and that became her doctor. So, the coincidence is just beyond anything we could have possibly dreamt of. And that,
And I
yeah.
think it's a living testament to Baylie. And as you talked about her promise and her brightness, that happened. And so tell our viewers and listeners
The name of the book is Baylie. Decided to just call it her first name. And the proceeds from the sales of Baylie go directly towards the foundation. The foundation is called the Baylie's Wish Foundation. And there are two parts to that. The first is getting healthcare proxies, HIPAA waivers, the mandatory forms that the necessary forms that you need to become mandatory in the college admission process so that they would actually be a part of the package. Every parent would receive it. And, you can deny that. You can choose not to fill out the forms, but it would be mandatory to sign off on them. Yes or no. Do you want these? It's too difficult for families. And many people don't even know they exist or that they need them. And if they need them, they don't know where to go to find them. And they say, do I have to pay an attorney $400 to do these forms? It should be easier and straightforward for families. The second part is to create a campaign. This is a pretty big mission, but we're focused on trying our best to do this. We would like to create a campaign similar to MAD, Mothers Against Drunk Driving, or DARE, which becomes a program in schools that educates students on the hidden dangers of college life. The things that no one tells you, the things that aren't taught in that initial first week at college for the freshman students. There is so much information out there. There's so much for families to know before they send their kids away. And it's almost like College Uncovered, where we share what happens when you get in trouble. What is the safety net? How can we create a safety net for these kids when they're in a situation like Baylie's, and educating them on how to solve these problems and how to get out of this dilemma. We also, with that, hope to change some of the policies and laws that are currently in place, expanding on the amnesty policy so that kids aren't afraid to call for help. Currently, that exists for medical emergencies that, if they're drinking underage or if there's drugs involved and they call for an ambulance, that, they won't be in trouble for doing that. But often what is overlooked is that although they won't be criminally charged at times, and every school is different, but at times the victim, the one who had too much to drink and they were underage, is now on probation from the school, or worse yet, suspended when they wake up in the emergency room. And that in itself is such a deterrent for kids to ask for help.
Absolutely. I think sometimes the system and society, whether intended or unintended, we've put too many roadblocks in the way of justice. And what I'm hearing, a question too, did you ever reach out to the insurance company about their policy?
The insurance company?
The insurance
No,
company
because
for
we
not,
fought with the insurance company so much.
which is a
In
fight.
fact, our health insurance was canceled while Baylie was in the ICU. We came home to Boston to find a letter in the mailbox to say that our insurance was canceled. My husband had to fight with them to get it reinstated. We got it reinstated, and millions of dollars later in Bailey's case, because she had so many neurosurgeries and abdominal surgeries and was in the ICU for so long, at the end of it all, they denied $600,000 worth of claims that we were ultimately responsible for. And for that, we had to go to court again to reduce that. So, that's a whole other level. That is a whole nother can of worms.
Absolutely. So let's turn to something you said earlier about the phone calls you've received and how
Oh my
common
God.
this is. Tell us more. Tell us, how do you respond? I guess that's a
Well,
good
it was
question
not like,
too. It's
it was not
obviously
like,
some
right? It was like
empathy.
I opened a can of worms. And, I had moms reach out to say, look, my son did the right thing. He went out to the clubs at university. They called for a ride share to get home because they had had too much to drink. They dropped him off on the freeway because he was too intoxicated. They wanted him out of the car because he was drunk. So the Uber driver pulled over and said, get out. He was hit by a car on the freeway because he was drunk. There's just story after story after story. And I really think there needs to be education and awareness through the schools on what to do and how to manage these things and how to prevent them. Story after story of kids, mostly men, males, who have been over drinking, and, their buddies don't know what to do. So they put them to bed. They carry them to their dorm room and put them to bed. And these boys have alcohol poisoning and they don't wake up the next morning. So the Corey Safety Act is another bill that is currently in Congress. We hope it's passed soon, which will force schools to share the data. Right now, there is a transparency issue with colleges. They're a $900 billion industry. They have incredibly big marketing campaigns. They tell you what you want to hear. They want your kid to go there. Reputation is everything. And they don't have to disclose what happens behind closed doors. The Clery Act ensures that they must report crimes, criminal activity. Crimes are when charges have been laid. So there's a lot of criminal activity that takes place where there are no charges, and that does not have to be reported. Currently, they do not have to report any accidental injuries or deaths. So there's no way to know how many kids died on campus last year. There's no data. Not only is it not transparent, they don't keep the data themselves. So we don't know how many suicides, how many drug overdoses, how many alcohol intoxications or alcohol poisonings, how many kids fell from a balcony, how many kids fell down the stairs, how many pedestrian fatalities happened within a mile of your school. And no one knows.
I think the importance of legislation in this instance is it's easy for one university to not want to do something because their competitors are not. So even if a university wanted to say, okay, we're going to report this data and make it all public, I'm sure there's the fear on the university's part that, well, people are going to see that and then they're not going to see anything from our competitor, and the prospective student is going to choose the other school. I think that goes to the importance of legislation to level the playing field. And I think when you're the victim or you're speaking on behalf of the victim, you can't turn back time. You can't erase that night, as much as I'm sure you've dreamt and you slept and you hoped and you tossed and turned, imagining if you could, but you can't. But what you can do is learn and look at, as you've done with great detail and dedication, look at the factors that can help someone else not have to live
That's
that
right.
same night. And I think that's it. And in this case, where you have different standards or no standard, it's easy for any institution, be it a university, a rideshare company, an insurance company, say, well, my competitors don't have to do it. I don't want to do it because I'm going to look bad. But I think part of the public awareness in what we do day in and day out is call attention to this and shine a light on the issues, because one thing criminals hate is awareness. They don't want a light shine on them. For decades, we've told people keep your porch lights on. Criminals don't want light. They don't want to be seen. They want to go under the surface. And as a society, we've created, and we keep creating more and more infrastructures through technology, social media, different platforms, different apps that unintentionally give criminals more places to hide. And to the point where today most crimes are committed online. What we're seeing is an online ecosystem develop where online enables something to happen easier in real life, which is what you dealt with. It's, you can track people online. You can order a ride share. You can do all these things online, which are great conveniences in many instances. But also we don't look at, okay, well, there's for every upside, there tends to be a downside. And there's this fear to confront the downsides. And that I think as a society, we just need to get over that. So for people listening and watching, how can they get involved?
We're always looking for volunteers. We really want to build this campaign as big as we can and get it into all the schools. There's so much more to this. I mean, the program that we're talking about launching would cover things like sextortion and scams that college students face that they're not familiar with. There's just a huge gamut of things out there that many parents don't even know are in danger. They don't even know what kind of trends are happening online in the social media circles that are dangerous for kids. On top of that, we really hope to get this safety app. University of Miami student who graduated recently developed an app that would have saved Bailey's life. And he developed the app because of these dangers, because of what he knew as a student. And the app records everything in the situation. So you get in the rideshare, you press the app, it's audio, video recording, takes in all the data, it can be submitted as evidence. And you can add up to 10 people to that group chat who can listen in on the recording live, who can then send the recording to 911 discreetly. They can track your location. The victim in the car can send a call to 911 or a text to 911 from the app. And they can also send an Amber Alert to the parents. So there's a lot of benefits from this app. We think it would have saved Bailey's life. We actually went to the schools asking them to adopt the app as for their students to give out to their students. They currently spent $90,000 a year to maintain the blue light system in the parking lot, which no one uses anymore because you have to stand under the light, press the button, and wait for police. But they said no. Why? Because it looks like the school is dangerous. Why do you need the app?
And that's why we need public pressure and awareness. So thank you for that. And the other thing that highlights is it's often said that criminals are the earliest adapters of technology. And think about it for a while. Sextortion videos, online porn, there were people making money over those things well before Jeff Bezos ever made his first dollar. And oftentimes law enforcement and others are slow to realize technology. And what you pointed out is a great example of a student who saw what was going on and said, hey, I think I can fix that. I think I can come up with something. And yet it takes us longer to adapt these things that are safe mechanisms that harness the technology and give us power. There's not one parent out there who worries about what their kids
That's
are
right.
doing up. And what we need to do is figure out ways to take some of that power back. The companies who create a lot of these software packages, we believe they have a responsibility to make sure every company has a responsibility to make sure that every product they
That's
put
right.
out is safe. And it's not acceptable to say, well, parents should do that. It's not a parent's job. You were fortunate and you were able to get some of the world's top medical care and top medical experts help. But you and your husband aren't medical scientists. And much like you wouldn't expect to go to the doctor or hospital and say, oh, my child needs this or that, and have the hospital turn around and say, well, you're the parent, you should fix it. There are certain things we are not expert
That's right.
in. We are not expert in algorithms and engineering, electronical engineering, the same way these companies hire the best and brightest out of MIT and Stanford to develop these software packages. And it takes another young mind, like, your friend that you talked about, who can do that. And I think what we need to do is think of more ways in which we can encourage that. There's this whole system of venture capital, and venture capital is aimed at fueling a lot of what comes out of Silicon Valley. And a lot more attention should be turned to putting pressure on venture capitalists to fund things that make life safer.
I agree. So we are looking at that right now, actually, for the foundation. We are looking at big corporate sponsors to try to get this done. We know that it's not going to be easy to try to get this into high schools and prepare seniors ahead of time for the dangers of college life. We also know that a kid's brain is not developed at 18. They don't develop their brain until they're 25. And yet we've put them in situations that they can't handle over and over again. And we took away the resources. We took away the educated people who knew what the dangers were, and we leave it up to the parents. So we actually have an incredible company we're working with who does college safety, who knows all the data, who knows all the facts. She actually used to work for the government in a terrorist capacity of studying terrorists and scams and online scams. This woman knows her stuff. She's created a company that can go to all the schools and do this teaching and share with them, how to avoid these dangers and what can you do to protect yourself. And on top of that, change some policies that create a safety net for these kids.
What advice do you have for a parent who might have a senior in high school who's getting ready to go to college? What are some real practical
things? Knowing what I know now, I would say really do your research. What we now know is that the marketing campaigns from the colleges don't reveal everything. And what you need to do is ask people when you go to do college campus tours, when you go to the tour, ask the people who are there what they think of the campus and what are the dangers on that campus. Because they'll tell you. The students on campus will tell you what's going on. On top of that, I would highly recommend that you look into one of these safety programs that are available out there. It's really a bummer that they cost money, and I'm so sorry for that. And I would love to raise enough money through the foundation to make these free for everybody and to put them in the schools. But right now, you have to pay somebody to teach your kid what these safeties are, what this program is all about, and how to prevent these dangerous things from happening to them. But I highly recommend that. And please, please, please get the app. There are so many reasons why you need that safety app on your phone. And on top of that, I would suggest you look into our program and look into the Baylies Wish Foundation and look at what we're doing. Learn what some of these stats and data are. Look at the Clery Act. Look at the Quarry Safety Act. Look at duty of care and duty to warn for these colleges. Understand the laws. Know that the illicit drink spiking bill has not been passed yet, which means that unless there's a sexual assault, you cannot be tested for roofies and GABA and ketamine in your system. So you can't press charges. So you need to know what the laws are, sign the petitions, get legislation changed, volunteer to be a part of the organization, buy the books so that you're supporting us and the money goes towards a good cause, and share this. Spread the awareness.
Well, for our viewers and listeners, you have some next steps, and I want to put a next step out there as well. The National Crime Prevention Council would like to work with your foundation to raise awareness among colleges and universities. And let's begin. Let's start doing a joint letter to all the associations that represent higher education, as well as university security.
Wonderful.
And let's raise their awareness and start putting more public pressure on them. And for those out there who are horrified about what happened to Baylie, don't do what you did. Don't just be upset. Take a next step. Write a letter, send a petition, make a phone call, buy the book. There are lots of little steps that you can do that make a difference, that will tell corporate officials, elected officials, and others, we do have a duty to care. And we're going to take that more seriously. And let's go from that. So I thank you so much for all you've done, for coming on today and sharing what I'm sure, even though you described your stoic image, and I have to say, watching you throughout this, stoic is a good word. But underneath that, there is the human part of you that this has to be so hard. And I think everyone has an obligation to help and not make it so hard. So thank you for joining, and we appreciate it. And for those of you who want more information, we will have information on our website, ncpc.org. What we do is what we've done for 3 generations. It's up to you. McGruff is not a superhero wearing a cape who stops all crime. McGruff is out there to help teach you, and it's your job to learn. So hopefully you learned a little bit today that will help you take a bite out of crime.
That's an easy way to take a bite out of crime.